Hello, everyone, and welcome to the beginning of our third season of Let's Talk Opera. My name is Joshua Bortz, and I'm the resident scholar here at Virginia Opera. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the 2023-2024 season and the first of our previews, focusing on Richard Wagner's Siegfried. Now, if you are new to Let's Talk Opera, if you are new to Virginia Opera, first, welcome. A little bit about how these programs go. I am speaking to you live, and so if you're joining us for this live presentation on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, wherever it is that you're viewing this, please make sure that you're logged into that platform so that you can ask questions in real time. I'll keep an eye on the chat so that I can answer whatever comes to mind. This program is then continue to be available for you in its recorded iteration. So if you are preparing for performances, if you have just seen a performance of Siegfried and want to dive back into the world that you have just experienced, this is here for you as well. And I'll continue to be monitoring the questions that come in through the comments as we move towards and past the time of our performance, starting in Norfolk, continuing the tour in Fairfax, Virginia, and then concluding in Richmond. So that's a little bit about this program. It's an hour long where we're going to give you everything that you need to know about the performance you are about to see. Siegfried is the third opera of Wagner's Ring cycle. So that means if this is the third opera of Wagner's Ring, and this is our third season of Let's Talk Opera, it means that we have done hour-long previews on the first two operas of the Ring leading up to this. That means if you are interested in the context surrounding Wagner's work, if you're interested in the biography of Wagner himself, I encourage you to check out our Let's Talk Operas available on YouTube and on vaopera.org to dive into those subjects. Today, we are focusing on what you need to know for Siegfried if it's been a while since you've been encountering the world of the Ring, or if you are considering or are bought a ticket and are diving in the deep end here with Siegfried. Our goal is to make sure that you are all prepared and ready for those performances. In addition to introducing you to the story up to this point and the music, we'll also spend a little time at the end talking about Wagner productions and Wagner as a stage director to give you a little bit more context surrounding the world of this fascinating repertoire. Wagner is unique in operatic history because he was not just a composer of entertainment. No, he viewed his art, he viewed his music as something far more important than just entertainment. Here we have all of the different roles that Wagner assumed throughout his life. He was a composer, he was a librettist, meaning that he wrote the text and the stories of all of his operas, taking in all the mythology that makes up the Ring and puts it together into one cohesive narrative. But beyond that, Wagner was a philosopher. The Ring and Siegfried and all of his works can be seen as works of philosophy, speaking to us on deep levels about what it means to be human, what it means to be a community, and what it means to create art. He was also a director, a stage director, and in fact, he was one of the first people to really see all of the sets and the costumes and the staging and the musicians working together to create a seamless whole. That really didn't exist before the end of the 1800s, and that's something that a lot of people don't know, which is why we'll dive into that particular subject here at the end of our time this evening. Wagner was also a prolific essayist. And for those who lived during the time of Wagner, who was born in 1813 and died in 1883, it was actually mostly through his essays that he was most known. Wagner's operas are huge, they're monumental. And so it was mostly through his thinking and his writing that most people realized how revolutionary he was. The dark side of this is it was in his essays where he was his most hateful and most controversial, particularly in his horrific anti-Semitism. That is a subject that Virginia Opera has been delving into. If you're interested, last fall, we had a moderated panel with our partners at Ohev Shalom in Norfolk, and that video is still available. And coming up October 4th, if you're joining us live and it is not yet October 4th when you're watching this, we will be doing a moderated panel with the Weinstein JCC in Central Virginia around this important subject when we talk about and grapple with the works of Wagner. So we will not be diving into that particular part of Wagner scholarship this evening, but know that there are ways that we can engage with that history, that painful history, in other ways surrounding these performances. Beyond that, Wagner was also a revolutionary. He literally fought in the Dresden Uprising, one of many revolutions that broke out in the middle of the 1800s and sought to overthrow oppression, overthrow monarchy, and create more democratic styles of government. The specific revolution that Wagner was involved with in Dresden did not, unfortunately, lead to that kind of radical change, and instead he was exiled to Zurich, Switzerland, and that is when he started writing The Ring. I think it's really important to acknowledge this revolutionary spirit in Wagner, and that he started to write The Ring not in a position of power, but in a position of exile, when the idea of Germany as a politically unified country was as far from being a reality as it could possibly be. After all, Germany was not politically unified until 1871. Later in his life, Wagner was also a bureaucrat. When Ludwig II, the King of Bavaria, took Wagner on as his patron, Ludwig being the patron of Wagner, Wagner became involved in court politics. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, but Josh, you just said that Wagner was a revolutionary who fought to overthrow monarchy, and here he's receiving the patronage and working in the court of Ludwig II, but that's a king. How does someone who's so revolutionary and anti-monarchy become involved in the courts of kings? This is ultimately what makes Wagner, I think, so fascinating, and why we come back to him again and again and can never really get to the bottom of who this person is. He was filled with contradictions. He was filled with so many different ideas throughout his life that we can never pin him down. There is not one way to view the life and times and works of Richard Wagner, just as there's not one way to produce each of his monumental operas. The mystery of all of this is what I think has made the works of Wagner so captivating, and why we still perform his masterpieces to this day. So, with all of that said, let's now start at the basics and do a little bit of review for those of you who have been with us on the journey of The Ring thus far, and give you some basic information if you are just joining The Ring here with Siegfried. So first, what is The Ring? What do we mean when we say The Ring or the Ring cycle? The Ring is the short term for what we call the full work of Der Ring des Nibelungen, or the Ring of the Nibelungs, the Ring of the Dwarves, a kind of race of people in German and Norse mythology who are kind of these dwarves who live in the mines. If you know your Tolkien mythology, if you know your other Norse and Germanic lore, you know about the dwarves who live under the world, crafting jewels and precious metals. So this is the Ring of the Nibelungs. And Der Ring des Nibelungen, the overarching story, is told in 4 parts. That's what we mean by a cycle. A cycle in art is when we have one story that is told in multiple installments. Think about like The Lord of the Rings, which is told in 3 parts. Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, Return of the King. You have a 3-story cycle taking us from the beginning of the Fellowship and the Ring, and then its destruction in Mount Doom during the wars surrounding it. Star Wars is another example. The original trilogy, the Star Wars trilogy, divided into 3 installments that tell us section of the life of Luke Skywalker and everything surrounding his quest to become a Jedi. So that's what we mean by a cycle. The four operas that make up Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen are Das Rheingold, which takes us to the creation of the ring itself and the world of the gods, and it sets up the kind of cosmic scope upon which the rest of the canvas of the ring will be painted. We then have the opera Die Valkyrie, or the Valkyrie, which takes us on the next journey of the ring, which we will talk about in a minute. And we meet the famous warrior goddess Brunhilde as she defies the will of the gods to bring about a new chapter in human and mythic history. We then get the third opera, Siegfried, and the whole thing ends literally in catastrophe and fire with Götterdämmerung, which is one of my favorite German words. Götter meaning gods, Dämmerung meaning twilight. So it's the twilight or the fall of the gods. You may know this term by its more familiar Norse version, which is the word Ragnarok. Because essentially, this story takes us from the beginning of the world and the corruption of innocence to the destruction of the gods in the beginning of a whole new world order. This work is monumental. It takes, depending on the conductor, about 16 hours in a theater divided across these 4 nights. Now, don't freak out. Virginia Opera is producing The Ring in the Jonathan Dove adaptation, which takes some judicious cuts and also allows for our orchestra to be performed in our smaller orchestra pits, because the original Wagner orchestrations require 80 to 100 people in order to play them, which are just forces that we can't fit in our 3 venues here at Virginia Opera. But you have this massive story unfolding that requires world-class singers, huge musical forces, huge sets. You don't get more monumental than this. And in fact, to gild the lily even further, this work premiered in 1876 in a theater purposely built for performances of The Ring. Think about that. This theater was built specifically for The Ring. It is the Bayreuth Festspielhaus, which is the festival theater in Bayreuth, which is essentially kind of halfway through modern Germany, there in Franconia on the northern border of Bavaria. I'm coming to you after having just had the opportunity to see The Ring in Bayreuth, and so I'll be giving you some insights in the midst of all of this as we have our discussion and preview Siegfried. So those are our 4 operas and little glimpses at the story that unfolds. But here is what makes The Ring even more interesting. Every performance of The Ring that you see will be different. Just as there's no one lens through which we can view Wagner's life, there is no one way to produce on stage this story. It is too big, it is too mysterious, it's filled with too many ideas. Wagner himself did not even fully comprehend what he created. And so this is a work that we constantly come to, constantly interpret, and has fueled the ideas and imaginations of thinkers and politicians and cultural leaders and artists from all backgrounds and all political viewpoints. In fact, The Ring, in many ways, says more about the viewer of it than it does anything about the wider world. Here's why I can say that. Unlike many other massive works of art, Wagner did not set out to make something so big. Even Wagner, who was a bit of a megalomaniac, did not set out to create The Ring as it currently existed. Instead, he started writing the libretto, or the text of the opera, for what would eventually be called Götterdämmerung. At the time, it was called Siegfried's Tod, or the Death of Siegfried. Started writing this right as the Dresden Uprising was beginning and this revolutionary fervor is unfolding. And it tells the mythic story of the death of the hero Siegfried. There was a little bit of a break, and then Wagner realized that in order for the death of Siegfried to be meaningful, you need to know about his life. You need to know about where he came from. And so Wagner set out to write a comic prequel to Siegfried's Tod that was called Siegfried. Think about that. This is a comedy. There are moments of the opera of Siegfried that are funny, that are light, that are very human. And it was because it was conceived as this prequel for Siegfried's Tod. Wagner then looked at his two librettos or libretti and said, you know what? This is all fine and good, but you know what this needs? In order for the hero Siegfried to be fully understood, you need to know about his parents. And so he created another prequel to explain the prequel to Siegfried's Tod. You with me? At this point, Wagner realized that his story actually wasn't about Siegfried at all, but instead about the lead god Wotan, or Odin, as he's known in Norse mythology, and about the fascinating and strong, defiant, independent Valkyrie maiden Brunhilde. So the whole ring itself begins to shift, but he didn't really go back and change much of the first two operas that he wrote. So he is preserving all of the ideas he's had thus far as they existed in real time, and he's only adding and expanding. As his focus on Wotan and Brunhilde came into effect, he then realized that the whole thing needed a cosmic prequel, and that became the opera Das Rheingold. So he backed his way into figuring out all four of these libretti. But when he sat down to write the music, he wrote it chronologically as the story is told, taking us from the creation of the ring to its destruction. So the most kind of rudimentary poetry is given the most incredible, complicated music, and the most advanced poetry is given the most rudimentary music. There are all of these strange relationships across the work that Wagner didn't necessarily intend, creating something that is far more unconscious than conscious. This entire writing process, from the beginning of conceiving of Siegfried's Tod to the premiere at the Bayreuth Festspielhaus in 1876, this process took about 30 years. So I'm in my 30s, so I'm about the age that Wagner was when he started to write The Ring. Maybe you're watching and you're in your mid 60s. The journey from me to you is the journey that it took Wagner to create this monumental work. Think about that. That's a lot of life. That's a lot of change. That's a lot of ideas that are enmeshed in this piece. And so there is no one way to interpret it, just as there's no one way to look at someone's life across such a wide swath of time. This is a captivating work that is always unique whenever you see it. Now, Wagner set out, as I mentioned, to create revolution, not just in Dresden, not just in the creation of Germany, but also in his art. And so there are many things that he did that I want to quickly mention because it changes how we think and how we hear think about Wagner's music and interpret what we hear and what we see. Before I dive into this, though, I want to quickly mention the experience of going to a Wagner opera is ultimately an instinctual one. It's an emotional one. And all you really have to do is lean forward and engage. In fact, in the Bayreuth Festspielhaus, Wagner purposely had seats and benches created that were uncomfortable and require you to sit up and sit forward so that you had to engage with what was happening. And I can attest to the uncomfortable seats in my experience having just been in Bayreuth. That's important because all of this analysis and all of the structure we're about to dive into only helps you more enjoy a performance. It is not required to enjoy a performance. All right, back to Wagner's innovations. The first thing that he did was he got rid of the word opera. He would hate that I have been calling this an opera. Instead, he called his work music drama. He thought the word opera was too associated with frivolous entertainment, high society life, and people only half paying attention to what's happening on stage. Opera for him had become a commercial transaction, not a moment of individual and communal transformation. So he called his works music dramas. That I think kind of sets the scene for the work that Wagner will create. The next thing that he did that is very important was he expanded the role of the orchestra. In the works of Wagner, and in particular in The Ring, the singer is super important, obviously. We love the singers, we love the singing, but the orchestra has an equal role to play as the subconsciousness of the piece at large. That it is the orchestra that actually structures and gives coherence to this massive undertaking. And he got rid of many of the basic ideas of opera, including the basic accompanying patterns of the orchestra, and got rid of arias and recitatives. Arias are the set songs in opera. Some of the most famous moments in opera are the solo arias. And usually in operas, especially of Wagner's time, you would alternate between an aria and something called recitative, which is the kind of speak singing that exists in opera. Wagner gets rid of it. He says, I'm going to do something new in order to move the music drama forward. But whenever you get rid of a big structure like that, you have to replace it with something. Otherwise, you're just filled with a collection of sounds that don't add up to much. So he created a system called the leitmotif. The leitmotif means the leading or the head motive. And what a leitmotif is an earworm. It is a melody that is easily recognizable, that is associated with everything from characters to places to props to emotions. And the really important thing is that these melodies transform. These melodies change as the drama changes. And one leitmotif, one melody will then transform and beget another one. Just as we see subsequent generations of a family, we see the organic development or mutation of all of these leitmotifs across the entire ring. Some of the most famous bits of music from the Ring cycle are these leitmotifs. For example, the melody of the Valkyries themselves, the warrior maidens. It goes dun da 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 dun da 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 dun dun da 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 dun dun da da da. Maybe you know that melody from Looney Tunes or from the movie Apocalypse Now, or weirdly in pasta commercials or something like that, whatever German opera is doing selling pasta. Very famous melodies that we associate with the Valkyries throughout the Ring. That's the example of one leitmotif. This technique is built in to all of the art that we experience. In fact, one of the legacies of Wagner in our modern world is the Hollywood film score. The theme from Jaws is like a leitmotif. All I have to do is hum two notes, da-na, da-na, and it conjures images of man-eating sharks and the mysteries of the deep. That is a leitmotif. And as the Ring develops, these leitmotifs grow and change and transform until you get to the last page of Götterdämmerung, that fourth opera, and tons of leitmotifs are pouring together and working together as if all of the memories of one mind are happening all at once. This is how Wagner structures his music dramas, through these simple, easily recognizable melodies that transform and grow. I mentioned that Wagner also wrote his own libretti, his own text to his operas. And he did not use typical rhyme schemes that you'll see in operas of Verdi, Rossini, or Mozart. Instead, he used a poetic device called Stoprhyme, which is alliterative verse. Poetry that repeats consonants and repeats vowels, what we call assonance. So when you're listening to Wagner, pay attention to all of the repeated consonants that you get throughout, creating fun tongue twisters that exist throughout the poetry. And this is an older style of poetry that we associate with kind of the medieval era. So it's sounding older and bringing the poetry into a modern age through these modern revolutionary techniques of poetry, drama, and music. Finally, as I mentioned, Wagner being the first stage director, or one of them anyway, conceived of his entire performance as a Gesamtkunstwerk. Gesamtkunstwerk. That's another great German word, Gesamtkunstwerk. Gesamt means the coming together. Kunst means art, and Werk means work. So a Gesamtkunstwerk is all of the arts coming together and working together to create one seamless whole. So the sets, the costumes, the staging, the orchestra, the singers, the lighting, the audience experience, all of these things are working together to create one communal moment of transformation. Wagner viewed his music dramas not unlike the Greek dramas of antiquity, where the entire community would come together for a festival that was both religious, spiritual, and entertaining to see their community transform. That is what The Ring was about. And he created in the Bayreuth Festspielhaus, as you see here, a theater to do just that. This was a theater where the house lights could go out entirely, so nothing distracts from what's happening on the stage. You'll notice the auditorium seating that actually looks like a great Greek amphitheater. It's a very unadorned space that forces you in and allows you to focus on the drama at hand. If this looks a lot like an AMC or Regal Cinema, you're not wrong. The modern movie experience has much to owes much to the works of Wagner, and in particular, The Ring and the theater in Bayreuth. Finally, before we move on, here are just a couple of examples of these leitmotifs. Notice how short they are. Again, these are very short little earworms that you will absolutely be able to recognize as the operas progress. So Wagner gets rid of the word opera, he gets rid of aria and recitative, and he replaces it with an orchestra that serves as the consciousness for the story, and he fills and connects and builds an organic structure out of an interconnecting web of leitmotif. So now let's turn our attention to the story of The Ring. The story that Wagner puts together is ultimately of his own making, but it is inspired by a number of different sources, particularly from Norse mythology. He pulled most heavily from a medieval text that was written at the end of the 1100s, beginning of the 1200s, called the Nibelungenlied, or the story of the song of the Nibelungs. He also pulled from the poetic and prose Eddas that tell us a lot about Odin or Wotan, Loki or Loga, and all of the adventures of the gods. He also pulled from the Völsunga saga, which is a story of German and Norse generations of heroes, and he even pulls from elements of the Brothers Grimm. In fact, a large plot point in Siegfried comes from the story of the boy who learns what fear is. He also used influences from Greek and Roman mythology to piece together this wider narrative that he created, telling the story of the ring. So let's now go into that story itself with Das Rheingold. And in order to tell this story, I am going to rely on my handy dry erase board and dry erase marker and see if this helps us tell the story, starting with Das Rheingold. The first thing we need to know about Das Rheingold is that it is a vertical opera, meaning that it is going to take us vertically from the realm of the gods to the realm of mankind to the world of the Nibelung, underneath the earth. So we have the sky, earth, and under it. We're constantly moving back and forth. And once the curtain opens, we are treated to innocence itself, the Rhine River that is unadorned and is totally free of corruption. And in this water, we are introduced to three Rhine maidens, three kind of mermaid-like water nymphs who are swimming around protecting the Rhine gold. This is gold that is at the bottom of the Rhine that cannot be stolen unless someone renounces love. And after the cosmic beginning of Rheingold, we then hear the gibberish, almost baby talk, of the three Rhine maidens swimming around, singing Via, Via, Vogelduwelle, which translates approximately to la 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 la. This is childhood, this is innocence, this is nature at its least corrupted. Into the scene comes a Nibelungen, a dwarf, and his name is Alberich. And Alberich, like a kid on the playground in elementary school, starts asking the three Rhine maidens if he can play with them. He says that they're pretty and starts to flirt and starts to try to attempt to have relationships with them. And they, like girls in a middle school football game or something like that, they taunt him back. They play with him. They make fun of him. And when the sun comes out to reveal the gold, they tell Alberich that the gold can only be stolen by someone who renounces love. But who would ever renounce love? Well, Alberich has just been turned down by three different Rhine maidens, and he says that if he can't have love, he will have power. And he then steals the gold, and he takes it down into Nibelheim in the world of the dwarves, where he creates the Ring of Power. This is a powerful ring that can control the world. And it's worth noting that you can only control the world if you renounce love, if you get rid of loving relationships, if you don't care about empathy, if you don't care about the people around you and the goodness of the world and the innocence of nature. The ring has been interpreted by many people over the ages. It's been a symbol of money, a symbol of technology, a symbol of modern warfare and weaponry. It's up to the individual production and the viewer to say what the ring means. And once Alberich makes the ring, he creates a reign of terror down in Nibelheim, where all of the dwarves are forced to work for Alberich, including his brother, Mima. Mima uses, with the power of the ring and Alberich, uses his power as a smith to create an object called the Tarnhelm that turns you into anything you want or even makes you invisible. And with these two objects, with Mima having created the Tarnhelm, terror is here in Nibelheim. As all of this is happening, we then go up to the realm of the gods. And there, the lead god Wotan, who's in charge of law and order, which he has on his staff. He writes all the laws and all of the contracts on that staff. He has created a contract with two giants named Fasolt and Fafnir. And they have been contracted to create the palace of the gods called Valhalla. And in payment for making Valhalla, Wotan will give them Freya, the goddess who is in charge of the magic apples that gods use to be immortal. At this moment, though, Wotan has a problem, and his wife Fricka comes in and says, Wotan, you can't give up Freya. She's in charge of our magic apples. She's in charge of our immortality. And what's more than that, she's my sister. How dare you? And so Wotan has to solve a problem. He's the god of law and order. He cannot break a contract, but he also doesn't want to give up Freya. So what is he to do? Well, he goes down with the god of fire, Loki, or Loga, down into Nibelheim and tricks Alberich, and he takes the ring. And through a series of machinations, the giants are traded the ring for the creation of Valhalla instead of Freya. But Alberich, who is mad at the ring having been stolen from him, curses the ring and says whoever has the ring is doomed to die. Wotan laughs at that, but at that exact moment, Fafnir kills Fasolt. And he turns himself into a dragon, takes the ring, and flees into the woods. And Wotan realizes, what have I done? I have unleashed a magical, all-powerful ring into the world, and I cannot destroy it. Why? Because it was in payment for a contract. This entire opera is built around the modern issue of what happens when what is right, what is moral, and what is legal are two different things. So at the end of Das Rheingold, as he goes to Valhalla, Wotan realizes that someone else is going to have to destroy the ring, but is going to have to do it without him influencing it in any way. So let's recap. At the end of Das Rheingold, we have seen the creation of the ring in a scene of innocence as Alberic renounces love, steals the gold, and creates the magical object. We've gone up to the realm of the gods, where we see the contract between the giants and Wotan. We've seen Wotan take the ring from Alberic, who's been terrorizing the dwarves and Nibelheim. We see the curse of the ring, and we set up the central problem, which is how do we destroy the ring without breaking the contract? Everyone with me so far? I hope so. That then leads us to our second opera, The Valkyrie. In The Valkyrie, unlike Rheingold, which took place in 3 different eras, takes place in 2. It takes place in the world of man and the world of the gods. It opens in the world of man, and we open in a house where we have a hut that has a tree growing through it, where there is a sword that is eventually revealed in that tree. And a man comes bursting forth. His name is Siegmund. And he is met by a young woman named Sieglinde. Sieglinde is in a loveless marriage, and Sigmund, it turns out, is fleeing from her husband. Both of them have lived horrific lives, and in one another find love and rest. Eventually, Sigmund realizes that he can take the sword in his moment of need, and they are going to go off, the 2 of them, and live happily ever after. But there's a problem, because they are twins. And so we have the forbidden love of 2 twins who were placed there by none other than Wotan. In order to figure out how to destroy the ring, Wotan gave birth from a mortal woman, these 2 twins, and says, with the help of this sword, they will destroy the ring. I'm not destroying it. I'm not breaking the contract. I've solved the problem. Sword, love, we're back in business. We can get rid of this all-powerful object. However, Fricka, his wife, says, Wotan, you can't do that. You need to be on the side of law and order, and I, as the god of marriages, will not stand for the love of 2 twins. I will not stand for that incestuous relationship. And Wotan realizes that she's right. What's more, he realizes that by placing the sword in the tree, by giving birth to these 2 twins, and by willing this to happen, he is influencing the destruction of the ring and therefore breaking his contract. And so he tells his warrior goddess Brunhilde, who will give little Viking horns here, that in the upcoming battle, Sigmund needs to die when he fights Sieglinde's husband. Brunhilde is perplexed by that, and she goes down to the mortal world, and she tells Sigmund that he will die. But she is confronted with what mortal love looks like. And she changes her mind. She, as Wotan's will, realizes that Wotan never wants to destroy love. He is not Alberic. He does not renounce love. And so she is going to help Sigmund win. This goes disastrously. And at the battle, Sigmund dies, the sword is shattered, and Brunhilde takes what she can. She protects Sieglinde, and they go fleeing off to run away from Wotan's anger. And in the final scene of the Valkyrie, at the top of a mountain, Brunhilde is punished for having broken the laws of Wotan. She is stripped of her godhead or her immortality. She is no longer allowed to be a Valkyrie. And Wotan kisses her asleep, and she will only be wakened by a hero. And she's surrounded by magic fire, so that only someone who does not know fear can come and awaken her. That is the payment for breaking Wotan's will. But the question is, did she actually break his will? Is what he actually wanted to do to save Sigmund all along? All of this discussion with Brunhilde, this argument between Wotan and his daughter, all of this allows for Sieglinde to escape. And that is the most important thing to think about as we start to consider the story of Siegfried. Sieglinde knows that she is pregnant with a son who Brunhilde has named Siegfried, and she goes out into the woods. It's at this point that we are now at Siegfried, the third opera. And this is when the ring comes back into play. For remember I said, the ring was last with the giant Fafnir, who turned himself into a dragon through the power of the Tarnhelm, that magical helmet, gone into the woods with his hoard of gold and with the ring. And Sieglinde has gone into that same forest. She unfortunately has died in childbirth, but not before Mime, the dwarf from the Nibelheim, finds her. And he takes the shattered pieces of the sword, he takes the infant child and raises him as his own. So when the curtain opens on Siegfried, we see wonderful depictions of adolescence, of the adoptive father of Mime and his adopted son, Siegfried. And things are not going well. If you've ever had an adolescent in your household, you know that things can get tense. What's more, Mime is raising Siegfried to destroy the dragon, take the ring, and then Mime will kill Siegfried and take the ring for himself. So the ring is back into play. Alberich is also waiting outside the cave, and Wotan, who realizing all of the folly of everything that he's done, realizing the impossible traps that he's set for himself, is now calling himself the Wanderer. And he comes into the house of Mime to try to give him some insight. And what is revealed is that only someone who does not know fear will be able to forge the sword anew and kill the dragon. It's at this point that I'm going to leave the story of Siegfried for you to discover, but those are the important players that we need to consider as we head into performances. Siegfried's parents were supposed to be the original heroes who destroy the ring. But because of Wotan's bad plan, that didn't come to fruition. The sword is destroyed, and Sieglinde has Siegfried out in the woods away from Wotan's control. Siegfried has now been raised up, and he's now been raised by Mime to kill the dragon, and he does not know fear. And the question is, who is going to get the ring, and who will kill who to get it? And also, who will be the hero who will cross the magic fire and take Brunhilde as their mortal bride? This is a hero's journey taking us through adolescence on through the journey and the growth of Siegfried, with all kinds of plot machinations, with dragons and all kinds of different things. So let's now turn our attention to the music that you will hear in this opera, and in particular the leitmotifs. And I want to introduce you to 4 of the leitmotifs. There are many that you'll see in Siegfried. Here are the first couple. Here is the leitmotif of the Rheingold. We heard this back in Opera 1. And this is a melody that is triumphant and fun and full of life. Got that? Rheingold, Rheingold, that over and over again. It's going to transform, however, once the gold is stolen, and we'll hear an iteration of that in just a minute. So with that earworm in mind, let's now turn our attention to the ring made by Alberich. Here's the melody of the ring, which is neither major nor minor. It's somewhat mysterious, for the ring can be used for great good and terrible evil. Da 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 da. A little mysterious, a little unsettling. That's the music of the ring. And whenever that melody comes up, we are talking, referencing, or thinking about the ring that Alberic created. Speaking of Alberic, here is the melody of the Nibelheim of those dwarves. It goes, I'm actually realizing that I don't have it here. It goes bum ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum bum. Think about dwarves sitting there with their jewelry, making their objects. Bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum 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 bum. So they use that music to talk about the Nibelheim and the creation of the ring. Final leitmotif I want to introduce you to is that of the sword. So triumphant. It seems like Siegmund will win and he'll be the hero. But we know that the sword will be shattered, forcing his son to forge it anew, his son Siegfried. So we've heard Rheingold, Rheingold. We've heard the melody of the ring. Da, 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 da. We've heard the melody of the Nibelheim, the crafting of objects under the earth. Dun, 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 dun. And we've heard the sword. Da, 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 da. Let's now turn our attention to the prologue of Siegfried. And I want you to hear how all of these leitmotifs come together and how they have transformed during the course of the ring. You're going to hear two low notes that sound kind of like the Rheingold motive, but it's not going to be the triumphant version that we were just listening to. No, this is going to be the dragon Fafnir, who's drunk on the power of the ring, who's become lazy with his hoard, and it's going to sound like someone half asleep going, Rheingold, or something like that, as that melody builds. And we're going to see how the dragon and the ring and the sword and the Nibelheim are all going to come together to create this prologue that sets the scene for the journey of Siegfried and Mima. Sorry, 1 minute. So it's actually looking like my music has been deleted here that I uploaded earlier with that prologue. So, with this slight gotta love live stream. So, what I want you to keep in mind when the ring begins, when Siegfried begins, is to listen for those four leitmotifs, the drunk Rheingold, Rheingold, as we go throughout, and pay attention to how the sounds of the Nibelheim and the sounds of the sword and the sounds of the ring are all mixing together to create a new soundscape for the opera. However, I do see here I have the great forging scene where Siegfried is forging the sword anew, taking that sword and crafting that, the sword of his father, to kill the dragon Fafnir. Let's take a look at this, and you're going to hear the melody of the forging song, another great leitmotif from The Ring. Pretty great, right? As we hear that forging sword, I also have found the music for the beginning of Siegfried. So with that forging song in mind, plus those leitmotifs, let's listen to how all of this transforms into the beginning of the opera, of the music drama. Very quiet. Sounds a little like the Rheingold theme, right? Rheingold. It's low, like the dragon sleeping. The tail of the dragon, maybe going back and forth. The gold which has been turned into the ring, which has been turned into the hoard of Fafnir. Filled with anticipation, rhythm of the Nibelheim. Bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. Mima raising Siegfried to kill the dragon. It's all there in the music. Rheingold, Rheingold, Rheingold. No longer triumphant, it's been corrupted. Terrifying. Transformed. Creating the scene of terror of the woods where no one is safe. Rheingold. The ring. We like motifs now working together. Rheingold. The sword that's laying in broken bits that needs to be reforged as we head into the music of the Nibelheim. And the lights come up on Mima as he's making swords for Siegfried, but he can't seem to make ones that are strong enough because he can't reforge the sword of Sigmund, the sword of Siegfried's father, and then our plot is in action. I hope this demonstration, I'm glad I found that music. I hope this demonstration shows how these leitmotifs transform and build the scenery, build the consciousness upon which the rest of the music drama will be painted. So let's recap. We talked about what the ring is. We talked about Wagner's writing process and realizing that there's not one way to look at this story. We then looked at the story itself across 3 of the operas, discussing Rheingold and Valkyrie with enough detail that you now know everything you need to know, heading into the story of Siegfried to see what happens to that adolescent hero, to Brunhilde up on the rock, to Wotan, who realizes that the destruction of the gods is nigh, and as a new age begins to dawn. What I think is interesting is that Siegfried deals with a number of really interesting philosophical themes. And even though it's a comic prequel of Siegfried's Tod, as we discussed, it is filled with really important ideas that are worth leaning in and paying attention to. First, it deals with the issues of love and fear. Siegfried does not know fear, but will only learn it once he kisses Brunhilde awake. And one of the best moments in all of opera, he says, as he looks at Brunhilde for the first time, "This is no man." He's never seen a woman before. And it's only in that moment that he learns fear. So what does it mean to be afraid? What does it mean to realize that there is something beyond you that can be lost? What is that moment that we discover fear, and how does fear control us? We'll meet in Mima's character. We'll meet someone who is anxious and constantly afraid, and that gets him into all kinds of trouble, especially when the wanderer, Wotan, comes into the cave and ends up gambling away Mima's head because Mima is so anxious and scared. This opera is also about generational transference or the gaps between generations, something that has always been a struggle for people. And we're going to see during the climactic third act, we're going to see Wotan confront his grandson. But Siegfried doesn't know that Wotan's his grandfather. He just thinks he's some old man and ends up shattering the spear of Wotan. All of the law and the order and the carefully built up society that we've seen throughout the past 2.5 operas is going to come crashing down because of the ignorance of the younger generation and the lack of knowledge and foresight and the sins of the older generation. We're going to see someone move from childhood and adolescence to a form of adulthood. And we'll see in the fourth opera if Siegfried ends up being the great hero he's supposed to be or not. We're going to see power struggles as we have Alberich waiting outside the cave for Fafnir. We have Fafnir, the dragon, hiding and hoarding the ring. We have Mima, who's using his craft to get the ring for himself. We have Wotan, who can't influence any of it, but is very interested in how all of this will go down. Who has the power? Who has the ring? Who is in control? Who will renounce love to get their own individual power? And finally, on a much more human level, we get issues of parenthood. I think every parent can identify with certain parts of the character of Mima and the wonderful interaction between the two of them. Siegfried is not kind to Mima, as many teenagers are not kind to their parents, and we see the frustration and the explanation and the attempts to diffuse most parents can identify with throughout the first act of Siegfried. This is a captivating and fascinating music drama that deals with a lot of really interesting themes that are still with us today. With the time remaining, I want to now turn our attention to Wagner as stage director, as the one conceiving of the Gesamtkunstwerk and of bringing all of the elements together. Because I think the Gesamtkunstwerk and the set and the costumes and the staging can sometimes hold audience members back. What's important to realize about performances of The Ring is that Wagner himself, after the first production, which looked something like this. Here we have, these are set models from pictures that I took in Bayreuth. Here is the first act of the Valkyrie. Here's the hut with the tree, with the sword. And then here's Act 3 of the Valkyrie, rocky cliffs with Brunhilde up on her horse. And all of the other Valkyrie maidens. This is what Wagner created, but he was not satisfied with what he created. And as someone who was always interested in the latest theatrical technology, he wanted The Ring to be performed differently. And especially in a post-World War II world, there was a conscious movement to move away from this kind of mythic representation of the ring. Very rarely will you see a ring that looks like this. Instead, you will see a different form of ring, for these are myths that are always timeless. And if we can look at the ring from so many different perspectives, no one ring is going to look alike. And so designs have shifted and theatrical technology has changed so much in the aftermath of World War II that here we have an image of Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde becomes this. And a Meistersinger von Nuremberg, which looks very realistic here, becomes that. So what's all of this about? Besides Wagner's legacy of wanting to constantly try new things? Well, ultimately, stage directors who are in charge of Gesamtkunstwerk are looking to build a concept, a central question of what they think this opera is about or this music drama is about. So, whenever you go to the ring, you're going to see lots of different kinds of sets and costumes, different takes on the ring. And before you jump to, do I like this? Do I not like this? I want you to ask the question, what is the director? And therefore, what are the designers? What are the singers? What are the orchestra? What are they saying the ring is about? What is this particular production grappling with? If you see a ring cycle that has lots of water in Rheingold and kind of wonderful hydro dams, and then when you get to the end of the cycle, all of the water is gone and the dams are filled with trash. We have a ring that is interested in the corruption of nature and in the eco disasters that surround us. That's the central concept, that what happens when we destroy nature? What happens if you have a ring cycle that is set in a Manhattan skyscraper? What is being said about power and about renouncing love for the stock market? What does the ring mean? In our Virginia opera production, we are so delighted to have a wonderful artist and director guiding our Gesamtkunstwerk, and you're going to see images that look like this. So I want you to ask yourself, what is being revealed? If there's no one take on the ring, what is this ring saying? What does it mean that there is so much technology? What does it mean that the world of the gods seems to be the world of virtual reality? What does that say about our lives in a world with AI and all kinds of developments that are spinning arguably out of control? Always ask yourself that question. What is being communicated by the Gesamtkunstwerk? And I think you will have a much richer and deeper experience, not only of the ring cycle, but of every single production that you see. Bringing this opera to life, we have a phenomenal cast, as you see here, with some returning artists. Our Wotan from our Valkyrie is back, Kyle Albertson, as well as Alexander Lushin as Brunhilde, along with some new singers performing the roles of Siegfried and others. We are so delighted with the musical forces that you will see. And I hope our time together, again, either live or on the recording as you're watching this to prepare performances, has gotten you into the mindset of Wagner's ring cycle. What is the ring? What is the story? How do we listen to the music? How do we lean forward and engage in the world of leitmotif, in the world of this mythic, monumental story? And then finally, a little bit about how to think about productions, particularly of modern productions of the ring that have moved beyond the original mythic construction of Wagner, just as he intended. If you have any questions, please comment in the chats. I'll keep monitoring them to ensure that you enjoy this opera, this music drama, as much as you possibly can. And I cannot wait to see you at the opera. Thank you so much and enjoy the show.